His trait was he was an olive tone green. Uziah was actually a green complexion. Like green, like if you ever look at an Ethiopian, they have that green complexion. That greenish complexion. This was the complexion of Uziah. That was the pureness. When they use the term melanin, this is pure melanin. And because of that, he became known as the Great One, or that God-like character. But what happened was, thank you, he married into also royalty by marrying Aset. Because Aset, or Aset, as it's called, or Isis, I don't like that word. Her name is Aset. But you know, Greeks call her Isis for when kids, when you go to school, when they say Isis, they really mean Aset. What happens is, she was a royalty. So they came together, but he was known as a deity from the line of the Netur, or the Netir. And he became known as a god in English. He was one of the biggest gods, according to them, when he stepped into the dynastic periods. So what happened was, Aset and him knew that they were going to have to conceive for, you know, the legacy of the Khalifa, the one behind him, to come. And he had a brother by the name of Satuk. Now in history, they got to Satuk's, one of Satuk's parents they're claiming was not of Earth. Uziah's parents was of Earth that lived here as Natir. But Satuk had one parent that was Natir, somebody that wandered in, you know, from somewhere else, some distant galaxy that they claim when you get to study. So Satuk didn't look as handsome as his brother. But Aset's sister was given to, named Nephis, was given to Satuk to be his wife to keep that balancement in the family. And Nephis never liked Satuk, she liked who? Uziah. As time went on, when it came time when Aset was becoming fertile, Nephis was fertile at the same time. But they collaborated, they were saying, I don't really want to have a child by Satuk. Look at him. And you know, they called Satuk Set. Set had orange hair, he was kind of busted, but he was strong, and he had a real aggressive mentality. So what happened was, Aset and Nephis looked like twins. Even though Aset was a year older, they looked just like twins, same height, everything, and they both were fine. They both were very beautiful. So what happened was, they got together on a feast because they knew that they was going to commemorate her getting pregnant. A feast, they collaborated together, and when every time they had a feast, Uziah was the one that made beer and wine, because it was the Egyptians that made beer and wine. So what happened was, they're telling, you know, we're getting ready to have a feast, so, Uziah said, okay, I'll get busy with my servants. So he's getting the beer together, and she's constantly telling them to test it. And then she gives him the wine to test it. You know, a lot of beer and wine, you don't walk straight no more. You start, I'm gliding now. So he got a little nice, for the lack of a better term, and we know that. And upon doing that, at the feast, remember, he was going to conceive with Aset. So he walks his way to go into his chamber, knowing he's going to run into her. But what he saw in the hallway, he thought was Aset, was Nephis, dressed just like her sister, looking just like her sister. You know, he a little nice, so he was like, come on, baby, you know, let's go take this walk. So then, she bears child. Satuk got pissed to the highest of festivities. You know, he found out his boo pregnant, he know he didn't do it. So he knew it was his brother by the twinkle she had in my eye every time he came around. It don't take much for us to see. You be looking at him and say, oh, you what? It don't take much for us, we know. So Satuk himself came up with an idea of having a festival himself. But in his festival, he also got, as Uziah, drunk. But he got into the drunk point where he fell out, and then the story goes, they cut him up in 14 pieces and threw his pieces all over Egypt and into the Nile. And then she was supposed to conceive. Aset did have a child, but the story goes, she didn't lay with no man, or no man touched her. Now, Nephis gave birth to who we call Animal, dog face. That was the baby between Uziah and her. And then Aset gives birth touched her. So that became a special impregnation. If you know about the men principle and the men temple, then we'll discuss it a little later on. But until that point, it went down in Roman philosophy and all that. And once again, she didn't lie with any man or no man touched, but yet she conceived sounds familiar. So later on, people started saying the Great Spirit coming through the vowels of Ray impregnated her because she had that association with Ray and all that. People started lying and making up false statements. In so much that when the Happy Casa got it, the Histos, white folks, what happened was they made a story behind it about how this great God who had died, right, and the essence of himself was thrown inside of the great Nile River, but he was able to spiritually impregnate his wife, the Holy Ghost. They called it the Holy Ghost. And then started calling her Mary. They started calling her Mary, and then they started taking the depiction of acid nourishing, breastfeeding her son. Later on, these same people took it and became known as a Black Madonna. And then you have this woman with this elaborate clothing on with a dark-skinned child, because she's dark. As centuries go back later, she started whitening up and she became Mary, the Blessed Mother Mary, with the child, Jesus. And they had to throw in the manger, because when they threw in the part of the manger, they couldn't explain the royalty of Usia with Aset and Haru. So they had to go the opposite. They went from royalty down to a bond. But then when you go back and you read the original Greek in the Old Testament, you'll find out that it was an inn. We call it an inn today, like an inn or a motel. That's where she conceived. And then she conceived the child, but they say it's in a barn to supersede to make the child special. That ain't special being brought up in no barn with no dogs and cows. Back then it was, because one of the safest places was a barn. That's not in this day and time. So that's where the manger story came from. If you go by all these men that have put it together in this day and time in the 2000s, year 2000, they'll tell you that what it represented was the fact that you had a star constellation. Because Jesus represents the star constellation called Pisces. And they call the Pisces the two fish. If you go to the book of Matthew and the book of John, you'll see how he is saying that I went and got men and made them fishers of men. I went and had two fish. A lot of Christians today have that fish symbol on the back of their car, but they don't know what it represents. It represents the star constellation of Pisces. Why? At the 2,000-year period of Aries superseded before the 2,000-year period of Pisces. Now, haven't you heard Jesus of 2,000 years ago? Because it marked a 2,000-year period. Jesus was born in the day one. We are in the year what? 2000 now. But we're not in the year of Aries anymore. We're in what? We're in the age of Aquarius, the water bearer. Before that, it was Pisces. And before that, there was Aries. And you knew it was Aries because Aries represented a horn. And that horn is what they call people to war, call people to assemble. And they went by the bull. If I do this and I go to Judaism, which took it, they'll tell you about a sun. Because this is a sun. But they'll tell you that the sun represented man. And they'll tell you that this one represented the woman. Why? Because in Judaism, they're telling you that the man is over the woman. So, being that this was the man and this is the woman, by virtue of the points, if you feel me.
Lately, we've been running across these DVDs off the internet. You know about the secrets in hip hop and all these ghosts of Mendez. I want you to expound on that a little bit. You know about why they wearing the little ghosts of Mendez shirts and the Vampirism and throwing up the same word they are really a part of.
Remember, this is what you would call a new cycle. When you talk about the moon cycle and the sun cycle, and what that means for people that don't know, for the last 6,000 years, we were in a moon cycle. Everything you learn is about lunar. Lunar meaning geared to the moon. They were saying how the woman was geared to the moon and the moon affects her menstrual cycle through water, but they wasn't necessarily talking about black women, they were talking about white women and how they could give birth to perfect birth because they wasn't at one time. They were having a lot of misfortune and a lot of birth defects. Like the brother asked me earlier, because of the chemical base of certain people on the planet, they lack certain chemical base. Here's what I mean. Like he asked me a question about vampires. How did it start? It starts through the fact that if you listen to the Quran says, Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq. Read, Iqra, read, Qara, to read. Read in the name of your Rebbe, sustainer. Never said Allah, it said sustainer. Read in the name of your sustainer, who is the caretaker of the boundless universes. That's why you say, Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq. Read in the name of your sustainer, who controls of all these universes, who created. What did he create? The next verse says, Khalaqa creates al-insan, man, from a clock. So it says, Khalaqa al-insan min alaq, because the word alaq means to clock. What that means is, in our blood, as people of Nubian descendants, black people as we're called today, what's in our blood is chemical base that have our blood to fuse. What that means is that in our blood is the ability to clock, meaning if we get cut, you clock, you have that scab come and your skin is mended. A lot of people don't have that chemical base in their blood. They have what they would call hemophiliacs. Where they get cut, they bleed for a long time. So they would have to have a replacement of their blood. If you go back and you study Nordic times with the Vikings and things, you go back and you study certain wars with Europeans, they were dying because they were bleeding to death. Until they ran into a group of people in Canterbury, this is a long story short, who they identified as very dark. The word that they used for very dark was Moors. And they gave them the ideas and the chemical base of how they could get a clotting mechanism, but they said you may need blood from us. So what they did was, as a hemophiliac, the Yorks and the Lancasters in their war made it their business to start drinking more and more blood in order to get that clot mechanism within their bloodstream. So now what does a vampire need to feed off to survive? He needs blood. It makes him strong. So they had to mix in with the blood. Now, some of them didn't drink. They mixed in the blood by having their women, white women, go and present themselves to the Moors so that they can have babies. In order for the children to come back, mix with their other children to give that blood for a blood mechanism to clot. In doing so, in getting with the Moors had, I wish I had bought it, the Moors had certain identification factors. If a Moor, hold out your hand, if a Moor greeted each other, it was because you had the strength and the leadership, and they said that the strength of the leadership would come through a lion. So that's when you got the lion's grip. If you didn't give it to them, they knew something was wrong with that person. That was an identification factor. If I came and I knew the sciences of the universe by virtue of the fact everything in the universe created by a circle and a square. A circle, then a square. A square and a circle within. I know that that's the diameters of the universe because there's nothing outside of a circle and a square. Everything in this room is circle and square. So being that so, I made a symbolism of a square. You see that? And I would acknowledge that I had it. As time went on, Europeans also adapted that philosophy. They started taking everything from the Moors just to find out that Moors had learned it from ancient African mysteries. So they started going into their family line that led them down to when Plato, led by Socrates, was a black man, and all the rest of those Greeks went in to learn these mysteries. As they learned the mysteries, they started coming out with certain symbolism. And that symbolism became deep. I'll show you what I mean. You know that behemoth I always show you in the book of Psalms with the horns of the goat? That became what they worshiped first. So when a black man does this, he's telling you he's the one that taught the behavior. He's the one that taught it. This is the whiskers, this is the horns, and when they do like this is the ears, because it looks like a goat. It's in chapter 119. So upon doing that, they made those symbols in their secret society. Once again, the tiger paws as a grip of acknowledgement for somebody that was echelon. If you didn't have that grip of acknowledgement, then you said that I was on a certain degree. So you put your hand and you put it on certain numbers, if you feel it. Then you identified it by, if you was on a long distance and you was coming from in town, you would do something like this to let you know you crossed the desert sand. I'm gonna give you a little bit, but not a lot. And then when you completed all of the knowledge that gave it to you, then you would do this. So not only do you see this in the hip hop world, because once you get on a certain plateau, which hip hop has done, because hip hop started something that was cultural, right or wrong, it was all cultural. Everything was talking about our oppression in the streets, and we were singing about it or rapping about it. Then it went from possession to a little money. Our oppression to a little money. You started, Biggie Smalls and them started talking about, you know what he did. Then it went from that to LA, and all of California got mixed up in it and became gangster. Then as the power started coming, because the original hip hoppers didn't have a dress code. They was wearing all kinds of stuff, right and wrong. That developed into a culture by virtue of the fact they identified with certain clothes. No longer were they wearing Adidas and things like that. They had people like FUBU were introduced. They started liking Timberland boots, and that became a fashion, which was nothing but a construction boot when I was small, but became a fashion as time moved on. But that was an identification with the culture of hip-hop. Now, they're going up the ladder. Now, by the time you get down to the money, and you start dealing with naming your corporation by one of the 5 families that helped run this part of the world, Rockefellers, you step into another mold of level of power, for lack of a better term. And once people like Jay-Z, just throw out a name, and others stepped into it, they got initiated into these orders because, I mean, they're sitting on millions of dollars. Once you start sending millions of dollars, you start affecting people. Once you start affecting people, you gain power. Once you start stepping in power, then you go into the empowerment of this planet that has a name. They don't use God, they don't use devil, they create God and the devil. They use the Illuminati, the bright ones, the bright pebble people, in which they have you illuminated. Illuminated is like imaginary or illusion. They have you in the basis of how they control it. And they are black people who've entered into it not knowing that they was the ones that gave birth to it. It was us that gave birth to certain symbols. We never used this symbol, we used this symbol to save when the Vikings was coming. That not only looks like a V, but that looks like their mentality of what they were saying as demons. You feel me? Now they're using it as a sign to let them know I'm in this order. And as all the hip hop start gathering, they're touching on these orders. And they're acknowledging people in the audience, because just like a basketball game, or football game, or an arena, or when you're sitting in any kind of entertainment, they always show everybody in the crowd, right? So a person from one side of the arena, the other side, can't really see himself, so he'll set up a sign and symbol. The guy who's either rapping or singing or playing football, basketball, he sends a sign or symbol when he sees one of his masters or he sees one of his elite in the crowd. And you're seeing it more and more because black people in America are rising up, rising up. Now that could be a good thing.